I want to take some time in Matthew. If you're going to turn in your Bibles to Matthew chapter 13. I'm going to be reading 1 through 23, and this is going to be the parable of the sower and the explanation, the whole narrative. I think it's important for us to capture the whole narrative here as we work through this. So here is our text from Matthew. If you're still getting there, Matthew 13, starting right off in verse 1 through 23. So, that same day, Jesus went out of the house and sat by the lake. I think some people were doing that this weekend, probably, right? Such large crowds gathered round him that he got into a boat and sat in it, while all the people stood on the shore. Then he told them many things in parables, saying, a farmer went out to sow his seed, and as he was scattering the seed, some fell along the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Some fell on rocky places, where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly, because the soil was shallow. But when the sun came up, the plants were scorched, and they withered because they had no root. Other seed fell among the thorns, which grew up and choked the plants. Still other seed fell on good soil, where it produced a crop of 100, 60, or 30 times what was sown. Whoever has ears, let them hear. The disciples came to him and asked, why do you speak to the people in parables? He replied, because the knowledge of the secrets of the kingdom of heaven has been given to you, but not to them. Whoever will be given more, and they will have abundance. Whoever does not have, even what they have will be taken from them. This is why I speak to them in parables. Though seeing they do not see, though hearing they do not hear or understand. In them is fulfilled the prophecy of Isaiah. You will ever be hearing, but without understanding. You will ever be seeing, but never perceiving. For the people's heart had become calloused. They hardly hear with their ears, and they have closed their eyes. Otherwise they might see with their eyes, hear with their ears, understand with their hearts, and turn, if they understand with their hearts and turn, and I would heal them. But blessed are your eyes because they see, and your ears because they hear. For truly I tell you, many prophets and righteous people long to see what you see, but did not see it, and to hear what you hear, but did not hear it. Listen then to what the parable of the sower means. When anyone hears the message about the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what was sown in their heart. This is the seed sown along the path. The seed falling on rocky ground refers to someone who hears the word and at once receives it with joy, but since they have no root, they last only a short time. When trouble or persecution comes because of the word, they quickly fall away. The seed falling among the thorns refers to someone who hears the word, but the worries of this life and the deceitfulness of wealth choke the word, making it unfruitful. But the seed falling on good soil refers to someone who hears the word and understands it. This is the one who produces a crop yielding 100, 60, or 30 times what was sown. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
So, I think as we go through this, don't we often sort of inject ourselves into that parable? Don't we often see, like, we land somewhere in that parable, right? Jesus is speaking to us in parables, and we land somewhere. I mean, we think we're in that narrative somewhere, and we should be. But it's often, I have a sense, as I study and read and pray and consider, I wonder sometimes if maybe we just sort of instinctually see ourselves in the role of the sower, right? We often will be there. We often envision, like, here we are at church, we're learning and we're connecting, right? We're going to go back out into the world and sow seeds, right? So it's natural for us, I think, to envision ourselves in the role of the sower. But of course, if that's true, then we have to ask the hard question, how much are we sowing? Are we actively sowing? Are we seeing seasons of sowing? Are we seeing seasons of harvest? Is there an active sowing going on? Farmers will tell you, right? Sowing, reaping, right? There's seasons and it happens, right? You got to do it. If you're a sower and you're not sowing, you're not really a sower. So that's a place of conviction that we need to think about as we inject ourselves into that role of sower. And then there's also, of course, I mean, if we're going to maybe not be the sower, if we're going to think about the soil, we're probably the good soil, right? We're all the good soil here, right? We're all in church. All those other people are doing other things today, right? They're the different kinds of soil, but we're all the good soil, right? Yeah, it seems like instinct kind of to, I mean, we might say, oh, sure, maybe I'm just the 30-fold, but we often identify with the soil, the good soil. And it's instinct, and it's easier to see other people as different types of soil. And I get that, and I understand that we often do that. But if we're honest and we take some time and we step back and we think, okay, well maybe, what was Jesus saying to us, right? We want to step back from the parable and sort of listen to it and take it all in and say, what is Jesus teaching us in that? And if we're honest, we should be asking ourselves regularly, what kind of soil am I? Right? If we're coming here regularly and seed is being sown into our lives, what kind of soil are we? Are we maybe the thorns? If we're honest with ourselves, are we the thorns? And is there a time when the teachings of Jesus that we're hearing week by week are getting choked out by the trials and the tribulation? We prayed about a lot of those this morning, right? There's a lot of people facing a lot of things. There might be people who aren't here this morning just because something came up and they just couldn't get through it. Might not be with us here now because there's some kind of turmoil going on and they're just not here to receive the word, right? And so we all have to think about that in our own lives, and are we there, and are we letting the word overcome the trials and the tribulations, right? We talked about the witness of this good pastor who over the years sowed seed in people's lives that came up. And so we got to be aware of that because we are going to face thorns. We are going to face trials and tribulations, right? We know that. Or are we the rocky soil? And this would be the case where Jesus' teachings are just, they're unable to bear these trials and tribulations. So they come along and they just get choked out by these things. I mean, we don't want that to happen. We don't want to be in a place where other things overcome the gospel truth, that centrality that you talked about of salvation, and being aware of the eternal things that draw us through these temporary trials. Or maybe the path. I mean, would we say there are times in our lives maybe we need to stop and say, oh, maybe I'm the path, and maybe Jesus' teachings aren't even taking root at all in our lives. You know, we come together on Sunday morning. It's possible, right? We come together on Sunday morning and then walk out of here, and Monday we face the world again, right? And Tuesday, and the birds come and they peck, and by Friday we're empty. And the seed just hasn't had a chance to take root. And so we need to be aware and to sort of fight against that and push against that. And this is sort of what Jesus is talking about when he's talking about in this parable and the sower and the soils, and he's calling us into something pretty specific. And he makes it clear, I think, through his explanation. And this is, we often take this parable to talk about what is right. About being right? Having the right beliefs. So when we hear this and we naturally, instinctually put ourselves in the role of the sower or in the role of the good soil, we need to think about these things because we're talking about a sense of worthiness or rightness, right? We see these different kinds of soils as though they're more or less worthy of receiving grace from Jesus or instruction from Jesus. And that we would certainly see that in the story as he teaches and preaches to the Pharisees, right? They're like that old Chinese proverb, right? It's hard to fill a cup that's already full. The Pharisees are already so full of what they know that Jesus can't pour anything into them anymore because they're right. They got all the right answers, right? And so we kind of tend to, our inclination is to see this parable as talking about worthiness or rightness. But instead, I think what Jesus is calling us to, instead of worthiness or rightness, is a responsiveness. We're not talking about these different soils as different kinds of worthiness. We're actually talking about different kinds of responsiveness, right? The sower is casting the seed anyway. The sower isn't discriminating between worthy and unworthy types of ground. What's happening is different kinds of ground give a different response to the seed that's sown. And so instead of talking about whether we're more or less right than somebody else, we should be talking more about whether we're more or less teachable, whether we're more or less humble, whether we're more or less bent towards Jesus' teaching. And I think that as we get into this, that's what Jesus is calling us to a sense of humble teachableness, so that we can be instructed by him. And this is why there's that question, right? Why do you teach with parables? Like, can you just sense that in the disciples? Have you ever read Scripture and you're like, why, Jesus, do you always have to answer a question with a question? Why, Jesus, do you always have to tell these parables and leave us to try and figure, what kind of game show is this, right? Except that it's not really a game show. Because the reason that Jesus tells these stories and these parables, I mean, there's two powerful things about stories. And as you hear this story, you envision the farmer sowing seeds, right? We get visuals. And so these stories capture our imagination. How many of you, let's be honest, during the teaching sermons that I was doing, when I was giving out all those details without any stories attached to them at all, how many of you wanted to just fall asleep? Right? Yeah? We can be honest about that, because that's what happens. That's the way we're built. Stories capture our imagination. They fire our attention. They draw us in. We're talking about stories, and we want to know what's going on. We envision ourselves in the story. We start to think about what the person is feeling or thinking. Also, Jesus uses stories because they disarm our defenses. Right? We get in argument mode. We want to talk about doctrine without stories, right? We through all that. We get in argument mode. We get these propositional truths, these things that we believe, and we hunker down, and we're going to defend them, right? We're not going to move for anybody. But what happened to King David when Nathan, the prophet Nathan, came to him about his own infidelity and his own sinfulness? What did Nathan do? He didn't crack open the Bible and start shouting at David, did he? He told David a story. He told David a story about a man who had one sheep and a man who had thousands of sheep. And the man who had thousands of sheep took the man's one sheep. And what did Nathan do? Nathan kind of dug tunnels underneath David's defenses. And Jesus is doing that with us, with these parables, right? He could be telling us something and we could just be like, nope, I'm not moving. But through a story, he draws us in and disarms us. And it's not about tricking us. It's about helping us to lay down those defenses so that we can hear the truth of what he says. Well, we get on the wrong end of something and we just want to throw up defenses and protect ourselves, right? We want to push everybody else out. We don't want to be connected, but stories connect us and they draw us back in. This creates a sense, this humble teachableness creates a sense of leaning in. And I think that that's what Jesus is talking about with the inner circle. We see the 12 disciples and we see the people coming to him after he tells this parable. He has this big teaching to this crowd from a boat on the shoreline, but afterwards we're seeing the parable play out because many of those people left when he was done teaching. There's a kind of ground there, right? And then there's other people who stayed and they lingered afterwards and they leaned in and they said, why do you teach this way? What does this mean? And that's a different kind of story, isn't it? So this parable was playing out even as Jesus taught it and explained it. It was happening right there. And as I studied, one of the favorite things that I came across, J.D. Walt at Seedbed. He's down at Asbury Seminary. It's a teaching organization associated with the seminary and the Wesleyan way, with Methodists and Nazarenes and Wesleyans, right? They create teaching materials. And J.D. Walt ironically, his title is the chief sower, right? And so he says this, I think it's a beautiful, beautiful wisdom about this parable and the teaching in parables in general. Parables, he says, are meant to inspire the kind of curiosity that seeks after understanding. Jesus, the teacher, is looking for people who will stay after class and approach the circle of disciples to press in for more understanding. This is why those who have been given will be given more. Those who have will be given more. Wisdom. Not righteousness, not rightness, not correctness, right? What they have is a desire to be taught, and so they will be taught more. Wisdom, which comes from spiritual understanding, favors the ardent seeker. It always has. That's worth saying again. Wisdom, which comes from spiritual understanding, favors the ardent seeker. It always has. And so this is about staying after class. This is about leaning in. This is about setting aside our preconceived ideas and letting Jesus teach us another way to see things. He did that so often, didn't he? How often did he say, "You've heard it said, but I tell you," right? Jesus is reinterpreting for us and drawing us into this narrative of grace, and he wants us all to lean in and want to learn. So speaking of learning and stories, okay, let's maybe take it away from the farmer and the sower thing, right? I'm going to take some privilege and I'm going to reinterpret this parable for you, and maybe it'll hit home with some more people. Just consider it this way, this parable in another way. A teacher went into their classroom to teach their students. And as they were teaching the lessons, some ideas fell among the tweeting students. And the Twitter feed came and washed the ideas away. Some ideas fell on athletes, where they just didn't have time for it to take root. They answered quickly because they needed the grades to start on the team. But when the pep rally came, the athletes were all pumped up and the ideas were forgotten because of the big game. Other ideas fell among poor students who were sadly distracted by hunger or shame of their poverty. Still other ideas fell on good students, where they produced a hope, and bachelor's, master's, and doctorate degrees were launched into. Whoever has ears, let them hear. I think that's the point of this parable. Whoever has ears, let them hear. Let us not be hard-hearted, rigid people who won't be moved, but let us set aside those things that we think we have to hang on to and instead just hang on to Jesus. Jesus really didn't say, "Believe me." Jesus said what? "Come, follow me." Now, we can set up fortresses of belief and we can define ourselves by the walls that we put up around us and how strongly we can be immobile. But Jesus said, "Follow me." And to be a disciple of a rabbi at that time meant that you moved and you followed. The blessing then was, "May you be covered by the dust of your rabbi." That was one of the best blessings you could speak to a disciple. And what that means is that they so closely followed after their rabbi day by day that they literally would be covered by the dust that was kicked up by their rabbi's sandals. And so it's not, we had our doctrine, right? We had our doctrine sermons, and we had our 6 weeks of talking about basic Christian doctrines, and that's important to know what we believe, but it's nowhere near as important as setting it all down and following Jesus. Follow what he did, follow what he said, go and make disciples, baptizing them, teaching them all that I have commanded. And how can we teach them what he's commanded if we don't know it ourselves? So we need to be leaning into the circle. We need to be receiving the things that Jesus is saying. And if we don't understand something, lean in further, stay longer, ask more questions. That's what we need to be doing. And that's my prayer for you, my benediction to you. May you be a people of humble teachableness. In the days and the weeks and the months and the years ahead, you're going to face all kinds of things. And you're going to have times when you're the path. And you're going to have times when you're in the rocky soil. And you're going to have times when you're, what's the other one? I'm forgetting. Anyway, you have times when you're the good soil too. Right? Cling to that. Be that. Being the good soil isn't just being something. Being the good soil involves intentionality. And you can be the good soil more often by leaning in. Following closer, finding out what he says, Even if you don't understand it, dwell on it longer. Talk to more people about it. Read some more things about it. You can spend all your time fretting over the thorns and the trials that come up to choke out everything you've been learning. But if you just lean into Him and hear what He has to say, and see the example of what He does, get to know the stories, follow after Him, be pliable like His disciples were. They were dumb sometimes, and they put their foot in their mouth, and they didn't get it over and over again, but they still leaned into Him and followed Him. We get it eventually.